Okay, with this section of the video, we're going to go over programming this particular clock, and you'll see I'm going to program it again when we do a turn on checkout. I'm going to show you the similarities between clocks, what they have to have, and then I'm going to touch on the wiring and some of the problems you may come across with your controller and with your sprinkler system in the future, especially if it's an older system. But first thing that we're going to touch on is basically the things that all controllers basically need to run. They need a current date, current time, watering start times, which is each zone will have each program will have a start time, and on those programs you'll have your valves. They'll be running on a set amount of time. So basically, you also have to have run times on your valves or your zones or stations and advanced cycles. Basically, if a controller has all that information, it'll basically run. With a lot of the newer controllers, they have more than one program. That's typically for, if you have a large yard, you can run half of it on program A, half of it on program C. If you have a drip system, you run it at a different time than you would use turf. So most of the new controllers have more than one program. Auto, as you can tell up here, almost all your controllers will have some type of auto function. That auto means it'll automatically run, of course. When we go to current date, every controller adjusts a little bit different, but basically you're able to move your date, time, or what have you with a set of buttons or a series of pushing buttons or so on. In this case, I have arrow up, arrow down. So if I want to set the current date, I can go to the desired month, and when it's right, this button has the manual start and advance. So when I'm in these modes, advance applies, so I advance to the next. And again, whatever's flashing means that I adjust that section. So it's the second day, up or down, arrow up, arrow down. Advance to the next, it's telling me it's the year, 2011. Current time, 3:12 p.m., that's correct. Same thing, whatever's flashing, I move. Same, whatever's flashing. One thing I will stress is that you can see this here, it says PM. That's difficult to see. A lot of the controllers, they don't have a backlight, and you'll see when it changes, it goes to AM. I've made this mistake before when I've been in a hurry. I'll go and program the time, and it'll actually be 1:15 p.m. and I'll set it at 1:15 a.m. So the clock, when it comes on to the start times, it'll be 12 hours off. So that's something to remember. Keep a close eye on that. And sometimes when the controller's in the garage, wherever it may be, sometimes it's difficult to see that. Start times, like I said before, it's telling me it's program A, my first start time. On each one of these programs with this particular clock, I have 4 start times. That works out good for me as a contractor when I want to sod, or sometimes as a homeowner on your day to water. Most municipalities have that. They have an odd, even, or certain times that you can water. On your day, you can sometimes water in the morning and in the evening. If I want to go to a different program, it's telling me it's off. Now most controllers, every time you go 1 minute over, it'll go 12 a.m., 1 back, moves in 15-minute increments, 11:45 p.m. If I want it off, I go 1 click up. Most controllers are like that. Now what I'm going to do is go to water budget or seasonal adjust. That's one of the two things that it'll be called. If it says 100% in zone 1 or valve time 1, which would be your first zone here, says 10 minutes. It says 100%. It's going to run 10 minutes. Let's say that in May you get a lot of rain. You bump it down 50%. It's going to run 5 minutes. The opposite goes that when you in August, if it gets real hot, you can bump it up 50%. What this does is it adjusts all of your valves instead of doing one at a time, trying to bump them all up. It's a real nice feature they've come out with in the past few years. Now test. A lot of new controllers have test on it. Basically, if I want to test all of my valves, this includes all of the valves that are on all your programs. So if I hit test, I hit start, I go back to auto, it's going to go through each zone for 2 minutes. Now I can adjust that up to 10 minutes with this particular clock. So each zone will run. This is nice when you do a turn on checkout or your winterization, because you're able to turn on the zones one right after another and watch them run and check them all out. Now, advanced cycles is basically you're choosing the day that it will come on and water. So if I'm on custom, I can come over here to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on, and I can turn it on or off. Now most municipalities, they always want you to run on a custom, on a odd or an even, excuse me. So, even, odd, or cycle. Cycle, some of the older controllers, and they run on a 14-day, 30-day cycle. So basically, same with this, it'd be a 30-day cycle. So for that particular month, you pick the days that you want it to water, but you'd have to reset it just about every month. And sometimes on some of them, you're able to program a cycle to do a cycle soak for the turf, a cycle for a longer period of time. You're also able to, in some cases, do more than 1 month. So most of the time people don't ever use cycle. Most municipalities always have you on odd or even. Now, set valve runtime. I know that with this controller here, or this irrigation system, I have 6 zones. And right now, it's showing no time. So, a lot of times, when you shut your system down for the year, it'll be in the opposition or you'll have your battery out. When you go back to start it, it'll still remember your run times. Sometimes with a lightning strike or something like that, and we'll go over that again here, it will lose its memory. Basically, I can adjust my times on my zones. Typically spray heads I run 10 to 17 minutes. Rotor heads I typically run 20 to 30 minutes. That's what we typically run them where I live. In the heat of the summer we run the zones actually longer, but that gives you an idea. Spray heads, they typically don't need to water as long because they're watering a smaller area. Rotor heads are watering a larger area and they typically need to run longer. That's one thing, that's why we never mix spray heads with rotor heads on one zone. Now I'll go and I'll touch. One thing I will touch on, in the opposition, some clocks have something flashing, whereas this clock, it's just telling me it's off. Sometimes it'll be off and either the first digit or second digit will be flashing. That's something to remember. Here you can see I have a sensor. That means a rain sensor. If it's activated, that tells me if I have a rain sensor on this irrigation system, if it's activated, And if it rains enough, the rain sensor will tell this not to complete the circuit to turn on the zones. Now, in a lot of cases, this will still run depending on what type of rain switch. In most cases, this will still run, but it won't complete the circuit to turn on the valves. Now on the inside here, this is an indoor clock. You'll see my power up here, and this is for my rain sensor. If I had a rain sensor, I would put my two leads up on here. Now if your clock is old enough and you want to put in a rain sensor, you can interfere with your common. Common wire is typically white in the industry. Some other contractors use different colors, that's fine. They'll typically tell you it's the common. In the middle here, I have an MV, which is a main valve. Sometimes it's nice to have a main valve. Basically what that is every time the controller tells it to come on, tells zone 1 to come on, the main valve will come on and charge the main line. So basically your main line will only be charged to the main valve. So these are my zone wires, and they're typically color coded. And 1 through 6. In this case, this is a modular controller, so if I want to add to my system, I buy more modules. I can go all the way up to 13. Now, one thing I'll touch on that happens quite often, especially when the system gets older, sometimes you program your clock and you get zone 1 or one of your zones won't come on. This is the very first thing that I do. I go through and I program, make sure I programmed everything correctly, and if that's okay, I turn it on and check it. If it still don't come on, I check all of my wiring connections, make sure all of these are tight, and I start it. If it still doesn't come on, I go and I check my wire connections, and I'll go over this with the valves. Check my wire connections at the valves and at any wire splices that are in the irrigation system. Sometimes those get corroded. If it still doesn't come on, I'll check my solenoid. Solenoids typically don't go bad. When the system starts to get old, then you may lose some of your solenoids. But this is the steps that I would go through to check that first. Now, if you ever have a problem with the controller is just on the fritz and it just does not want to work, if something's at a glitch, if you've had a power surge like lightning, or if something just got out of whack. With some controllers you unplug them, take the battery out, leave it for a couple hours and come back. In this case, I can erase the memory. Oops. There we go. I push that, I wait, and it's cleared. That means that I can start all over. That's a nice feature. A lot of clocks have some way of erasing the memory. If it's an older style clock and you have some problems, you need to start over, unplug it, pull the battery out of it, and just let it sit. And then come back, put the battery back in, plug it back in, and reprogram it. Very rarely does a clock go bad. Once in a while it does. If you do that and you program it and something still doesn't work, if something is flashing kind of funny up in here, then chances are your clock is bad. But it doesn't happen very often. Another thing that a lot of the new clocks do is if you have some sort of surge or some sort of problem, let's say zone 1 comes on and it skips it. This particular clock has an alarm light. The alarm light will come on and it'll tell you something is wrong, like MV error, or it'll give you some type of reading up there to give you an indication of what it's sensing. Now the book that comes along with the controller will help you diagnose that, and sometimes that happens. Now also with this particular controller, if you have the rain sensor activated and you get a lot of rain, the alarm light will come on. It's telling you that the rain sensor is wet or it's full of water, whichever type you have, and it's not going to come on. If you have another situation where the alarm comes on and you want to reset it, this particular one has a reset here. I have my battery out right now. So that's something else that could happen. Most of your controllers, they have instructions on the inside panel, and typically they have some place for you to write down your zones to tell you where they're at. So basically, that gives you an idea of the basics on what controllers need to work and how to program this particular controller. And I'm trying to touch on things that typically happen, and I'll touch on them real quick here. Sometimes if you have a wiring problem, a zone coming on, just remember, always check programming, wiring at the controller and at the valves and at wire splices, then your solenoids. And also, just remember, all of them basically program the same. So that concludes this section. What we'll go over some valves and touch on the drip systems. Okay, along with this section, we're going to go over the valves and troubleshooting some of the problems you may have with those. We're going to touch on the drip systems and a few other little things that I've come across over the years, and a few things that may help you with your sprinkler system. What I'll do now is I'll move up close so you can get a better look at what I'm doing. Now I have two sprinkler valves here. One's made by Rainbird and one's Toro. And there's always a little bit of differences in the style or type that you want, but they all basically work the same way. This is your solenoid. This is the solenoid on the Rainbird. This one has a flow control. This one doesn't. Now, I can get a flow control on a Rainbird valve or what have you, but first thing I'm going to do is touch on how you would manually turn on a sprinkler valve. With this Rainbird valve here, I have this bleeder screw. If I turn it about a turn and a half, the valve will come on. Water will come out the side here. That's normal. Also, I can turn the solenoid a third of a turn. That'll make the valve come on too. Now if you have a valve with a flow control, in this case I can't turn the solenoid. This one has a stem. If I back this stem out, the valve will come on. Now remember, this stem will come out and water will come shooting straight out. So hang on to this and don't lose it. Now, a flow control does exactly what it says. It controls the amount of flow coming out of the valve. If I turn it down, it restricts the flow. Turn it all the way up, it opens up all the way. Now this particular valve here, when it opens up as much as the top spring will let it open up. So basically almost all the way. As you can tell, both solenoids have two wires. One goes to your common wire and one goes to the zone wire, and they're typically color coded. Some sprinkler systems, the one that installed it may have used a solid red or a solid white or what have you, but typically industry standard, white is your common, the other color coded is your zone wires. Now, some of the problems that you'll come across with your sprinkler valves over the years is the solenoids may end up quitting. Basically what this is a magnet. What it does, it releases the water on top of the diaphragm to open up the valve, and it also closes it. What happens is when these go bad, it won't open or close. Now, when I was in there talking about the wiring on the controller, I was telling you some of the first things you should check if you have a zone nut coming on. And that's your programming, your wire connections, and a lot of times what I'll do is I will check my wire connections, and sometimes if the system's kind of old, I'll redo them. Get my wire strippers, cut them, give a nice new clean connection, and use a new waterproof wire nut. That's important. You should always have some sort of waterproof wire connector. If you've troubleshooted everything and you find out that it may be your solenoid, you can check your resistance. Every solenoid, they basically are about the same. I think they range anywhere from 40 to 50. That's normal. If you ever have a question, look at the type of valve that you have, get online, they'll let you know. Basically, I get a regular voltage tester, and I test my wires, touch positive, just either one. It's saying I have 41.8. I know that that solenoid's okay. You can also turn on that particular zone if you know the color coding, and you can check your voltage. Now, most of your sprinkler systems run on 24 volts, 24, 27 volts. That's another thing you can check. Now, another problem that happens, let's say that you have a mainline break, and when your mainline breaks, sometimes you get garbage inside of it. And then that garbage inside the valve, when it was leaking, it was pushing stuff into the main line. It makes it to your valve. And once you turn this valve on, it's weeping. Basically what I mean is either it won't shut off at all or it'll barely shut off. So when you walk out in the yard, you'll see a sprinkler head with a little bit of water coming out of it. That means you may have some garbage inside your valve. That's preventing the diaphragm from closing. Okay, with a lot of the manufacturers you can turn the valve on manually, which will open it up all the way. With this case, that's what this bleeder screw is for. When we install a new system, this is how we turn on all the zones in case we have some stuff in the main line to flush it out. When I open this up, it allows that diaphragm to open up all the way. If that still doesn't fix the problem, you'll need to take the valve apart. And when you do this, the water's off, of course, and you'll need to make sure your valve box is clean. No leaves, grass clippings, so on, inside your valve box. And you need to clean out from underneath the valve a little bit, because when you start taking these off, they're going to have water back behind it, and that will release the pressure off your main line. A lot of them use Phillips screwdrivers, some of them use nut drivers. They have nuts on top of the screws, what have you. But you'll take this cap off, that's what I call that the bonnet, and then you'll have the diaphragm, and then the body of the sprinkler head. You can see the water comes in, goes up and over, and down into to come out. Now, some valves allow the water to come in and out differently, but they all basically work the same. This will seat against here. When it's closed, you have equal pressure on the top and bottom. Now, if this is cracked open just a little bit, it'll always allow water to come out. You'll take it apart, you'll look inside here, and if there's a rock or anything like that, you'll get a piece of wire and you'll clean it out, and you'll check this, make sure it's not damaged. Then you'll put it all back together. Now when you put this valve back together, remember you're dealing with plastic. You don't have to tighten these down super tight, but tighten it down like you would the lug nuts on your tire, alternate it. Then charge the main line and turn on the zone, and it should work. Most of the time that always fixes the problem. If it still wants to weep, sometimes you need to replace the valve, and if you need to replace the valve, you buy the same type of valve, and you don't always have to pull the top, the whole valve out. You can sometimes take the bonnet off, put a new bonnet and gasket on it. So basically you would buy another valve, take the bonnet and the diaphragm off and put it on the old body of the valve. Now, that's pretty much it for the valves and the differences and how they all kind of work the same way. If you ever have to replace a valve, always remember to pay attention to the direction of the water flow. They typically have arrows telling you which direction, or in most cases the solenoid tells you what direction if it's facing where you want the water to go. Now some of the other things I'm going to touch on you may not have, or you may have, I'm not sure, but these are things that I come across sometimes, and this is one of them. This is called a king drain. This is for your lateral line, which goes to your sprinkler heads. Sometimes these go bad. They start leaking, and they're meant for self-draining systems. So when the system is off for the winter, it allows everything to drain. When you come across these, they'll have some rock underneath. It's going to be connected to a fitting like this and a lateral line or a main line. Main line ones are red. In this case, green is for lateral line. If they go bad, you'll need to dig up around them, unscrew them, put a new one in, and make sure you replace the rock underneath it. That's important. Sometimes the little valve inside here goes bad. Now, what I'll do now is I'm going to touch on a battery operated controller. Most people don't have these, but I've had customers come up and they say, I like to add a zone to, like, let's say my garden, just to water my garden and stuff like that, and I don't have a large enough controller and I don't have enough wire, or it's so far away from the house it's not feasible to run that much wire. This is an alternative. This battery operated controller runs on a 9-volt battery, easy to program. It's made by Hunter. It's very nice. It's a very good little controller. It'll only run one valve. It won't run two. Has a battery inside here. It's waterproof. You use what's called a latching solenoid. Runs on a 9 volts. So this is an option in case you ever want to add a zone. But I would check to make sure it's cost effective. These are like $150. Sometimes you can upgrade your controller for that much, but sometimes if you weigh the cost and this is the cheapest way to go, you can go this way. But it wires up just like any other valve. It has 2 wires. These are your 2 leads here. Now this is a rain sensor, And with this particular type, and most of them, you do have to do some general maintenance. They have wireless ones that are real nice these days. In the beginning they had some trouble with them, but they've come a long ways. Now if you have this type or some of the others, if it's on a rain gutter or hanging on a fence post, sometimes you need to check and make sure that leaves or debris didn't go around it to plug it up or prevent it from doing its job. And this is the thing that with that particular controller I just programmed, this element will soak up a bunch of water and it'll stop your sprinkler system from coming on. That's when that alarm light will come on. But once in a while you need to take this apart, clean it with some nice clean water, shake it, and then put it back together. And you can set these to 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 3/4, 1/2 inch of water. Catches the water. In this case it soaks it up and grounds it out. Others have a little catch basin which will the water will fill up and ground out the system. So these are very nice. They're nice in the aspect of saving you money with your water bill, and it's also good for the environment because when it rains we're not watering our lawn. Now another set of valves I'll touch on are drip system valves. You may or may not have a drip system, but these are the two types that I use. This is more of a commercial type. Once in a while I use this on a residential when I have a very large drip system. Basically an irrigation valve. This one has a flow control solenoid. It's just positioned a little bit different. This one has a pressure reducer. Most of your drip systems always will. But this is the thing that most of them have, some type of basket to catch the debris that's in your potable water source from filtering, from getting that debris into your emitters and plugging up your drip system. You need to clean these once in a while. Use hot water and clean them, and every once in a while if you have a hard water situation you may need to soak them. And this type here, it's a 3/4 inch valve, just like the valves we were looking at. Solenoid bleeder valve. In this case the pressure reducer is built inside, and it's at 30 psi. Now most drip systems run 30 to 40 psi. This has a screen just like the other, and you'll take this out and clean it. Most of the time you only have to do it once a year. I have some customers that never do it. But when I turn on their sprinkler system, I always check them and make sure they're clean. So that's something you should do if you have a drip system. If you have a drip system that just has a valve, you can just purchase the Y filter with the pressure reducer, and I advise putting one of them on it. Now I'm going to touch on some of the drip system stuff that we have that I typically use, and I'll show you some of the stuff that I come across that I have to repair. Now, a lot of drip systems use this 1/2 inch tubing. Sometimes if you have flower beds next to your house or what have you, this is underneath mulch most of the time. Mulch is what I meant, like wood mulch, rock mulch, or down south they use a lot of pine needles. Sometimes this gets broken, especially if someone plants new plants. It gets nicked or cut, and you'll be able to hear it hiss when it's running. All I do is, these are compression couplers. Whatever type you have, the type that I use is Dead FM and Rainbird. They're both really nice. You can buy a compression coupler. You cut your bad section out, you couple it back together. Now if you ever have a section where you have some emitters not working, I recommend on the end of a run putting a T or a coupler and then putting some sort of flush cap. Basically what that does is it allows you to open this up once a year or twice a year if you're in a sandy situation, turn on your valve, and it runs all the water out of your sprinkler, out of your drip lines, and it helps flush it clean. And this here is an emitter. Sometimes these little 1/4-inch tubing will get broken or cut or nicked. Sometimes bugs crawl up into the ends here, and sometimes you have to cut them to clean the junk out. They do make bug caps, so if you have that problem, they make bug caps that you can put on here. And another thing to help with that is maybe you can get some stands like this. You stick it in the ground, it keeps it above the ground, just at the base of the plant. Works real nice. And I'll touch on a couple other things, like if you ever wanted to add to your drip system, let's say you planted a few more plants, you can easily tie into it here. This is an emitter. This is made by Rainbird. Tap into it and run your 1/4-inch tubing to the plant. Remember that most drip systems run for an hour. They water slowly to allow the plant to absorb the water. It's the most efficient way to water your plant material. So if you ever need to add on to a plant, you can go and buy some emitters. I typically use 1 gallon an hour. You don't need to go and purchase the tool that's designed to put them in. You can just use a pair of pliers and grab them. Just remember it's plastic. This will go in. You'll be able to push it in to the pipe. You'll hear it snap. Wiggle it a little bit. Run your 1/4-inch tubing to your plant and you're set. Another thing that I'm not sure if you use these, but we use them a lot. This is a type of accessory to a drip system. Goes in the ground, the drip tubing comes straight to here. I don't use an emitter. I tap straight into it with a burr coupler here. This comes up, sprays water out, sometimes half circle, full circle, what have you. They're very nice. They you shove this in the ground, tie it to it. Sometimes these get broken. Real simple, real easy to fix. Now bubblers, you find these on trees. Sometimes they'll shoot out little streams or they'll just bubble water off the top. These have a tendency to get hit a lot with weed eaters. They're typically on a nipple. They'll get broken. Things that I've done in the past is I will get rid of the nipple and I'll get the screen. It'll fit right inside a swing pipe L. And I'll put the bubbler on here and I'll run swing pipe and put it at the base of the tree. If you still think it's going to get damaged, I'll get a 6-inch round valve box and I'll put this inside the valve box like this. The tree will still get water. It still works good. You may come across that. Well, that concludes this section. And I touched on wiring. That's wiring and sprinkler heads. That's mostly what happens to a sprinkler system over the years. But now we're going to move on to the next and go from there. Okay, this is the Hunter SRC series. And we're going to go over this controller. Also to show you the similarities between all of them. What I'm going to start with is, you'll see run. That's what it will be on if you want the system to run what you have programmed. When it says system off, it'll be off. Like when I winterize it for the year, system off the whole time. Or if you get a great deal of rain, you can come turn it off for a few days, then come back to run. Or if you have a rain sensor, it does that for you. Then this will do a program where you can run it and bypass the sensor. In this case, this clock don't have one. But you can see the similarities. It says here, set current date and time. So we have a current date and time. Set watering start times. Set station run times. and set days to water. And this would be a manual station, single station, manual all stations. I call them zones. In this case, they're calling them stations. So if you hear me say zone, I mean stations too. And then systems off. So what we'll do is we'll set this current date and time and year. So right now it's telling me it's 2010. So if I go up to 2010, to go to the next, I hit next. It's telling me it's the 10th month. It's a plus or a minus, whatever changes it. And it's the 9th day, plus or minus, changes it. Next. In this case, it's 3/11. And I hope you can see this. It's really hard to even see it. I'm going to zoom in here. See this little flashing arrow here? It's telling me it's 3:11 p.m. We can run this clock on a 24-hour clock, p.m. or a.m. Now this is the thing that I always say to take notice in the spring. To set the current date, you want to make sure if it's 3:11 p.m., you want to make sure that this isn't 3:11 a.m. That's what I mean, where your start time might be correct, but the current time is off. What that means is that this is telling us a certain time. It'll be running 12 or 10 hours off. So if you want it to come on at 3 in the morning, it may be coming on at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So the same thing here. See how I'm going PM? So if it's 24-hour clock, it'd be 1512 hours. 1500 hours. 1512 hours, correction. But it is PM. Now, since I showed you that, I'm going to back up here. Now we go to the next. Whatever's flashing, I can adjust. Arrow up, arrow down. Arrow up, arrow down. Or plus or minus. Now that's all set. Now, start times. This is 1 a.m. Now, something I want to show you, and you'll see, I'll zoom in again, you'll see that arrow change. See, it just went down to PM. But this system comes on at 1 in the morning. And right here you'll see program A. It's really hard to see. If I go program B, it's off. Program C, it's off. Same thing too. You just go over midnight, it's off. So we're only running on one program. Program A. Zone run times. Same thing, whatever. I'll back up here. Plus or minus. Next. In this case, they have 7 zones. The reason why they all say 10 minutes is because it was unplugged. So in the spring, we're going to turn this on and set each zone. So remember, if I go 1 minus, 99 minutes. So remember not to push too far past 0. Set watering days. I'm going to zoom in again here because it is difficult to see. Most controllers are this way. Right now it's on even days. And if I want odd days, but see, even I get a little confused here. I work with so many different programs sometimes. But now it's odd. I hit the next button. Now it's even days. If I go down here and I'm on Sunday and I hit the plus, I can pick what days by hitting plus or minus I want it to run on. So Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. But we want it on even days. As soon as I hit even days, they all erase. Now, manual single station. I'm going to back up just a little bit more. Manual single station. Okay? Now this controller is different than the Rainbird one, where I can just hit manual start and go through the zones and keep hitting it. But in this case, I go, if I want zone 5 to come on, I hit next until zone 5 comes on, turn it to run. Let's try that again. This controller is kind of old, so we'll go to zone 3. So I go to run, that tells me that zone 3 is running. And I'll actually run from 3 to 10 minutes. Now if I want to run, now the same as the others, if I go to system off, wait a few minutes, it'll shut down. Now if I want to manual all stations, go to manual all stations. Let's say I want to start at zone 3. I turn to run. It's going to start at zone 3 and run through all the zones. And again, I can just turn it off. It'll hesitate, then it'll turn off. You open up this controller, has a battery backup in case the power goes out, has a fuse. Okay, this is my power, this is my rain sensor. I better tilt this down just a bit. There we go. Let's start all over here. You won't be able to see all the abbreviations on this, but this is the battery in case the power goes out. This is your fuse. This is a nice option if for any reason a surge or something goes wrong. Sometimes even with a solenoid, this will kick. I'll blow this instead of hurting the internal workings of the clock. These two black wires for the power, plugs into the wall. This is my common. Most of the time we always use white. Well, I always use white as my common, but I have seen red and other colors used, and sometimes all the wires are the same color and they use one of them. But these two here, it says RC, that's for your rain sensor, and then MV, that's for your main valve start. So in case you have a valve in your main line, that has to come on to charge your main line before your valve to your lateral line comes on to turn on one of your zones. So you see that in a lot of larger systems because the main line will not always be charged. It is a nice option sometimes for a residential too. A lot of times the homeowner don't want to go to the extra cost, but the thing that this is that the main line is only charged to the main valve, and anytime zone 1 comes on, any of these valves here, this valve comes on first, and then the blue wire here, since it's zone 1, will come on at the same time. It'll charge the main line and the lateral line at the same time. Then when you look at these wires here, this is telling me they have 7 zones. 8 and 9 are not being used. They're color coded. And in this case they got a couple extra wires, which is always nice. In case something happens to a wire, you always have a backup. Now back up a little bit more, turn you over. Same with most controllers. It has instructions over everything that we just did. This here is where you can write down the zones. I didn't install this system, but a lot of systems that I install, I always write down here where the zones are. Like if zone 1 is a spray head, I'll go spray heads, front yard, east side or west side or what have you, so on down the line. So now that we've winterized this sprinkler system, I'll show you something else, because some people unplug this battery and leave it off to the side or on top of the controller, and others just place it inside here and leave it. I would change this battery every year or every other year. So we'll close this up. And so that is our Hunter SRC controller. Now on to the next. Okay, now I'm going to talk about backflow preventers. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I wanted to show you how to program the Rainbow controller and show how the controller turned on the valves, and I'll show you how the valves work. And one other valve I want to show you is your backflow preventer, and it basically is a valve. And it's also called an anti-siphon valve. And what this valve is for is to protect the potable water source that the city provides for you from the sprinkler water in your yard from siphoning into the potable water source. These are very important. And most of your municipalities in this country require you to have some sort of anti-siphon valve or check valve in your sprinkler system. Now with this one here, this is called an 800 M4. It's a 1-inch backflow preventer. As you can tell, it has two ball valves. And I'll point something out about a ball valve. You can see how this handle is in line. That means that it's on. You'll see this one is turned the opposite way. It's off. A ball valve is always this way. This is always on, this is always off. So it's something to always remember. Some have long yellow handles, red handles, what have you. As you can see on this here, we have two little valves here. These are used to bleed pressure off. I use these a lot every time I winterize. Now I wanted to go over these because sometimes they break. This is a freeze cap on this particular type, and there's several different types out there. And this sometimes breaks. Now you can buy kits to replace them, but once in a while, and I'll show you, O-rings go bad. You just go to your local hardware store and buy these O-rings, because if you go to the supplier, they cost way too much money. And as I'm taking this apart, you can see here's another O-ring. You can actually buy this O-ring too. And I snap this apart. You give it a quarter turn. A little metal retaining ring. Then a spring. And then another gasket. Okay? This basically, you have your seat inside here. Water comes up, pushes this up with the spring and the retainer, and this is here, and then your cap. This pushes this up into the cap to seal it. And how it's designed to work is that when it's charged, this will seat up into the cap and allow water to come up in and out. Now, if it senses a big leak, this will fluctuate and move. And then you'll have water come out the top of the cap. You'll sometimes see this happen when you charge the system in the spring. That is normal. Another thing that I'll point out about this backflow preventer is that this one is designed to be 1 foot above the highest head in the yard. Okay, so the head that you have, the sprinkler head that you have in your yard, this backflow preventer, and they're typically mounted on the side of the house, needs to be 1 foot above that sprinkler head. So let's say that you had a whole zone that was 3 or 4 foot above your water source, which in this case is your backflow preventer where the water comes out. The dumping mechanism, when that zone's on, sometimes they'll mess with the pressure and they'll dump water every time that zone's on. So that gives you an idea of what the purpose of this particular backflow preventer is. Now if this breaks, you'll have to buy a kit. Now a kit can range anywhere from $60 to $130. But that gives you an idea of how they work, and with this particular type, it shows you what you can do to repair it. Just like anything else, it goes right back together. Put it in, quarter turn, snaps right into place. This goes in here, O-ring on top, screw on the cap. Now some of these I've seen where you can't take them apart, but most of them you can. Now this particular backflow preventer is a reduced pressure. In this case it's made by Watts again. Has 2 ball valves, and this has a dual check. Has 2 check valves in it, whereas that one that we just showed you had 1. It has a check valve in here and a check valve in here. Now if you have the sprinkler system where you have sprinkler heads that are above the water source, that are higher, you would need to use one of these. Okay? And they always use a dual check or a reduced pressure backflow preventer if they ever put one indoors. Where I'm at, you always have to use one of these. If the sprinkler head is above the water source, or you put one indoors. If you put it indoors, this has a drain on the bottom. You have to be able to take this to a floor drain in the house. Now you can see this has a series of pepcocks or drain valves, whatever. Every time you winterize your system, you're opening these up. Now this one here can be a little bit more complicated, but once in a while they do go bad. What's kind of ridiculous about this is that the kits for these are really expensive, but you still have some spots where there's O-rings, and I'll show you. You have an O-ring in here that goes on the end of here. This one sometimes goes bad. And sometimes this O-ring goes bad. Now, if this diaphragm has any type of hole in it or tear, it'll leak. And if this ring here is bad, you'll have to buy a kit. Okay? So there's not as much as you can do to this, but you can buy a kit to fix these. And they'll come with a lot of parts. And you can even replace the check valves. And there's one on the other side too. Water comes in, but if water ever tries to come back this way, it closes. Okay? And just like all the others, put it back the same way you took it apart. Most of the time the homeowner won't have to do this, but in case you do, you'll save yourself a couple $100 by fixing this yourself. Now, one other check valve I want to show you is this valve here. It's a regular irrigation valve, but I wanted to show you with the backflow preventers because this check valve here is serving the purpose of the backflow preventer or anti-siphon valve. This is just like any other valve. Has a solenoid, turn the solenoid, comes on, has a flow control. Right up at top has two wires, just like a regular irrigation valve, except it has a check valve. Okay? Now, when you see these used, you'll see them on the side of the house, and you'll see one of these above ground for every single zone. And sometimes you'll see 5 or 6 of them in a line next to the house. Now, in some states, these are illegal. In my state, you can use them. I don't particularly like them. I like it when those other valves that I was showing you, those are all underground in a valve box. Those last a long time. I would recommend using those. But if you do have these, no problem. It is harder to replace parts on them though. Sometimes if you want a solenoid, sometimes you have to buy the whole valve. But I just wanted to show you can tell water comes in and goes out. And this is your check. So basically, that's how that would be. All right, that's it for back.